It begins in the summer of 1958 on a humid Michigan morning inside a test cell buried deep within Ford's engineering center. The room is shaking so violently that even the concrete floor is trembling. The air hangs thick with the smell of hot oil and burnt fuel. In the middle of all this, a prototype V8 engine sits chained to the dynamometer, screaming at full throttle as the gauges dance dangerously near their limits. An engineer shouts over the deafening noise, warning that oil pressure is dropping. Just seconds later, the exhaust note flattens, the crank slows, and the entire engine dies with a metallic groan that echoes through the chamber. That engine was supposed to be Ford's answer to the most feared power plant in America, the Chrysler HEMI, a legend already rewriting the rules of horsepower, racing, and automotive dominance. Most people know the HEMI, but almost nobody knows the engine Ford built to challenge it. An engine so huge, so ambitious, and so misunderstood that it never stood a chance. This is the story of how the 430 MEL tried to compete with the HEMI and lost everything. Most people have no idea what really happened, but you are about to. The late 1950s were a strange era in Detroit. The horsepower wars had not fully exploded yet, but the first sparks were visible. Drivers were demanding more power, more torque, and more bragging rights. Automakers began to realize that bigger displacement and higher compression ratios translated into bigger sales. Ford decided they needed a new flagship engine, something massive and luxurious, something that could power the heaviest Lincolns and Thunderbirds with effortless authority. That answer became the MEL series, named for Mercury, Edsel, and Lincoln. Sitting at the top of this new family was the behemoth known as the 430. With a huge 4.3-inch bore and a 3.7-inch stroke, it displaced exactly 430 cubic inches, running compression ratios as high as 11:1 depending on configuration. These were wild numbers for 1958, and on paper, they suggested Ford was ready to compete with anyone. But in reality, the problems began immediately. The MEL was never designed like a racing engine. It was designed like a battleship power plant, built with thick walls, heavy castings, and a combustion chamber so odd it was nicknamed the bathtub. Instead of the wedge or hemispherical chambers found in high-performance engines, Ford carved a deep trough directly into the block while leaving the heads flat. The valves hung over that trench, creating airflow that was mediocre and efficiency that was worse. But torque was where this engine excelled. The early 430 MEL produced 490 pound-feet of torque, a staggering number for its era. Horsepower ranged between 345 and 400 depending on carburation and tuning. It was built to deliver quiet and effortless thrust, not high RPM heroics. And that is where the trouble began. Across town, Chrysler had unleashed the 392 HEMI. It featured a 4-inch bore, a 3.9-inch stroke, and produced 375 horsepower with a hemispherical chamber that breathed like it was alive. On the track, the HEMI could rev the MEL could not without serious consequences. Ford knew they were outmatched, but they could not simply walk away. They had to try something bold. The turning point came from an unexpected place, the 1958 NASCAR circuit. Ford's racing program was desperate. They had strong cars but nothing that could compete with the HEMI on high-speed tracks. Some people whispered that they needed a miracle. Others quietly wondered if the MEL could somehow be that miracle. Most engineers dismissed the idea, but one group did not. The Special Vehicle Operations Team believed the MEL's massive displacement could be a secret weapon. If they could improve the airflow of the bathtub, chamber and lighten the rotating assembly, perhaps it could stand a chance against Chrysler's monster. So they tore the 430 apart. They slimmed the pistons, experimented with thinner rings, reshaped the ports, and pushed the compression dangerously close to detonation. They even tried a dual 4-barrel carburetor setup to force as much air into the engine as the design allowed. Horsepower crept upward, 420, 430. Some whispered dyno sheets suggested 450, but it still was not enough. Power was not the only issue. Reliability was a nightmare. At 5,000 RPM, oil pressure plummeted. At 5,500, bearings seized. Push rods bent, valve springs snapped. After one violent dyno pull, a mechanic described the destruction as looking like a grenade had gone off inside the crankcase. Meanwhile, the Hemi was doing things that seemed impossible, running 6,000 RPM all day, winning at Daytona, dominating drag strips, and everywhere power mattered. Drivers would openly say, if it is not a Hemi, it is not competitive. Ford's engineering teams felt the pressure rising. Then 1959 arrived, bringing a small but meaningful victory. In that NASCAR season, Ford-powered cars won several races. Most were running the FE Series 352, not the MEL, but the headlines simply read Ford wins. Executives began asking difficult questions. If the FE engines were winning, did they really need the MEL? Why were they spending so much money trying to force a luxury engine into a racing role it was never designed for? But the racing engineers refused to give up. They pushed even harder. By 1960, Ford introduced a more aggressive racing version of the 430 with revised valves, stronger springs, and a hotter camshaft. Compression hit 11-to-1. Power was rumored to exceed 475 horsepower in full competition trim, but Chrysler had already moved on to the next generation of Hemi architecture, the foundation that would become the legendary 426. Suddenly, the MEL looked prehistoric. Another major issue was weight. The MEL weighed nearly 700 pounds fully assembled. The 392 Hemi was heavy too, but not like this. The MEL's massive casting made cars nose-heavy and unpredictable at high speeds. Drivers complained that the front end felt like it wanted to dig into the track. Mechanics described the engine as too big, too slow, and too late. Ford then attempted to push the MEL into drag racing, hoping its massive torque would save it. At first, the results looked promising. Some teams recorded low 13-second quarter-mile times. Others achieved high 12s with stripped interiors and open headers. But drag racing is not only about torque. It demands RPM, airflow, and the ability to survive extreme stress for 12 seconds straight. The MEL could not handle it. The bathtub chamber restricted high RPM breathing. The oiling system starved the crank. The heavy rotating assembly tore itself apart. There is a story told quietly among old drag racers about a 430 that launched hard, shifted into second, and immediately sent connecting rods through the block, punching holes the size of baseballs into the pavement. The team never came back. While Ford scrambled, Chrysler kept refining the Hemi with better heads, improved cams, and superior valvetrain geometry. That hemispherical chamber continued to move air like nothing else. Ford had one last opportunity for the MEL to prove itself. The 1960 Daytona race. A hot day under immense pressure with executives watching from the stands. Ford fielded several cars, including one equipped with a heavily modified 430 MEL, the closest thing to a Hemi fighter Ford had ever created. When the green flag waved, the MEL-powered car ran strong for a few laps. Then oil temperature spiked. Pressure dropped, smoke poured from the exhaust, and by lap 26 the engine was finished. The Hemis kept running. That race officially marked the end of the MEL's competition dreams. Ford executives shut down the racing development program and diverted resources to the FE series, the engines that would evolve into legends like the 427 side oiler and the 406 tri-power. The MEL returned to what it was originally intended to be, a luxury engine. Quiet, smooth, heavy, and powerful in an effortless way, but never built for battle. Over the next few years, the MEL slowly faded. The 430 shrank to 383 cubic inches for Mercury and later grew to 462 for Lincoln, but none of them returned to racing. Meanwhile, the Hemi evolved into the 426, an engine so dominant it was banned from NASCAR. It broke drag racing records and became a cultural icon. It defined an era. The 430 MEL became a footnote, a rumor, a symbol of Ford bringing the wrong weapon to the wrong war. The truth is simple. The MEL was never meant to be a fighter. It was a quiet king, a silky powerhouse built for the biggest and softest Lincolns on the road. But Ford tried to turn it into a gladiator. And when they set it against the Hemi, an engine born for violence and speed, the outcome was inevitable. Yet the story does not end there. In a strange twist, the MEL's failure sparked something greater. When Ford abandoned the MEL for racing, they poured everything into the FE. That decision gave the world the 390, the 406, the 427 high riser, and eventually the side oiler, the engine that crushed Ferrari at Le Mans in 1966 and 1967. Without the MEL's failure, those victories may never have happened. In that sense, the MEL lost its war with the HEMI, but its defeat helped shape Ford's future. Today, MEL engines rarely appear at car shows. Few collectors chase them. Parts are difficult to find. Interest remains limited. But if you ever lift the hood of a 1958 Continental and see that massive chunk of iron, you are looking at one of the strangest, almost great engines Detroit ever produced. A 700-pound reminder that the wrong design can still create the right legacy. The HEMI dominated racing while the MEL faded quietly, yet both shaped the automotive world in their own ways. Ford never again tried to send a luxury engine into battle, and Chrysler never forgot what it felt like to win against every challenge. In the end, the 430 MEL did not just lose to the HEMI, it lost before the fight even began. But its defeat pushed Ford to build the engines and cars that would rewrite automotive history. If you enjoyed this deep dive into a forgotten power plant, let me know which story you want next. Another rivalry, another engine, or another piece of American horsepower history waiting in the shadows.